So right now, we're on the full moon. Depending on where you are, cloud cover, etc., you can see it big and bright in the sky tonight. It peaks in the middle of the night, basically, near midnight or a little past in the west coast, and 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the east. And it's in the 23 plus Gemini Sagittarius polarity. And so, first level to explore on a personal level is if it connects to your chart, which would mean planets in that region, meaning if they're at those degrees or nearby, somewhere between 20 and 25 of Gemini or Sagittarius, and then also Virgo and Pisces. That's the quadruplicity that is affected. And the counsel there is tune in, see if you can feel it, because that's how astrology works. You tune in and assess the feeling. And in my experience, the full moon tends to be quite charged. It's actually quite energizing. That's why a lot of people report difficulty sleeping, or possibly almost a sense of anxiety. And the other thing that I notice about full moons is that they tend to be up and down. So I'll notice during the full moon period, spanning at least 2 or 3 days, meaning a little before, a little after, as well as at the peak point, and noticing periods of hours that feel inspired and really up, and then other periods where there's more of a down feeling. But now, in terms of the effect overall, for example, on the country, it turns out that these degrees are close to the American Mars and the American Neptune, that Mars-Neptune square. So there's some risk there of violent events. Whenever you get Mars involvement, Mars is pretty combative all the way to violence. And so I suppose that's a possibility. And from there, what I'd like to also say is that this full moon, and the fact that pretty much concurrent with it, because by tomorrow Mercury goes direct. So Mercury is now making its station, coming out of the retrograde cycle it has been in for about 3 weeks. And you'll recall that I had said in November, in regard to the possibility of election changes, the discovery of some potential malfeasance and so on, that we would need to look at the stations as they developed November, December, January, and in November we had the Saturn station, and we also had that full moon in the middle of November with a Uranus trigger. To be honest, that was probably the best opportunity, but not much happened in that respect. Nevertheless, we then entered the Mercury retrograde cycle. There was a Neptune station in early December, a few days ago. Now we have the Mercury direct station, middle of December, plus the fact that there's a full moon concurrent with it pretty much around the same time. And those are degrees that are very important in Trump's chart, because he has his sun at 23 degrees Gemini. So this full moon is definitely linking to him. And so that would be another opportunity there for something to surface. Beyond this, you get into January. If the situation continues and nothing changes, then there is the Era station in mid-January, which is not particularly helpful to him either. After that, there's a Uranus station at the end of January, but that's beyond the inauguration point. So now, having said all that, as you've heard me say in prior videos, I'm not terribly optimistic that anything is going to change in this respect. And in fact, I think if I'm weighing the odds, it is a lot more likely that if something happens to Trump's presidency, the potential of his presidency, etc., it has more to do with the risks to his health and well-being because of the slew of aspects that he's dealing with, both around now and into 2025 and even beyond, but definitely in 2025. And if I assess other factors, you get a bit of a mixed bag because, for example, if you look at Inauguration Day, you notice that the Sun is conjunct Pluto. That has the feeling of a, similar to what happened in 2016, an American Carnage type thing where you do ultra masculine bro talk, you could say even borderline fascist talking, the feeling of it, Pluto's Sun. But you also notice that around that time, Mars in its cycle is in Cancer, and it's conjoining where his Saturn-Venus conjunction is. And so, based on that, you could surmise, possibly, project that it would be a huge problem for him, because that's not a very good, a very safe aspect to be in. But on the other hand, it could just as easily be part of the presentation, part of what goes on that day, because all that is telling you is that Mars is around, there's anger, there is aggression, and this guy does this by default. So all that would do is add to the possibility of that type of message at that time, right? However, either way, so let's say, for example, we reach that point and it's just the way it is. He's being inaugurated and he's giving, one of his angry speeches. But then there's what comes after that. And what is really obvious after that is that right away, the Saturn cycle, and if Mars is important, Saturn even more so, particularly for people that have trouble expressing Saturn properly, namely, he does, there's no question, because he has a very poor relationship to matters of discipline, matters of self-control, all of that is very difficult for him. So then you can see that late January, all of February, and all of March, it is on him really, really hard, because right at the January point, Saturn is squaring his natal Uranus, and then it proceeds to February, reaches his moon in a square, then the Sun. That is very complicated, very difficult energy. But that applies both to the idea of governance, if you're trying to do things, execute things, organize things, administer things. Saturn, in that kind of aspect, is very challenging, and it's very challenging for people that are actually competent. Never mind people that are not competent. Then it's even more of a problem. But the other problem he has is that where it is then, at that point, and by point I mean for a good solid 10 weeks, that's in his 8th sign, squaring Sun and Moon. 8th sign is the worst place, or one of the worst places for Saturn to be, particularly for a person whose natal Saturn lives in the 12th sign. The 12th sign, well, there's many meanings obviously, but one of the meanings is it rules the hospital. Basically, that's a health planet automatically, and then if you transit it over to the 8th, well, that's the death house. So it's very threatening in a place like that. I mean, best results that I see in the 8th, short of that, people get surgeries, major interventions happen. But it's pretty much one of the worst places for the Saturn to be transiting. Of course, on the other hand, we've seen that, this guy is like America's, I don't know, syphilis, gonorrhea, and herpes in one package. He seems to be impossible to get rid of. So perhaps he gets through that period as well. But even if he does, there are other periods later in 2025. In fact, off the top of my head, there's this swath of time spanning from the fall of 25 and into early 26, when Saturn will be in the late degrees of Pisces, making a station in there. And that is not helpful territory either, because from those degrees, what it does is it challenges his rising Mars in the very dangerous 150-degree aspect that astrologers call inconjunct or quincunx. And again, from the same sign, though, from the 8th. So, same thing again. You're playing with the same themes, both in the sense of governing, but much more dangerously to your body, mind, energy, and all the implications of that. So, I'll end there. Happy full moon to everyone. In upcoming videos, I'll be talking about the chart for Elon Musk, because people have asked a lot of questions about his prospects, his energy, his connection to Trump, to the country, etc.